At midnight, the house was quiet. 2 little girls asleep, the shop light burning outside like a dare. James set 3 things on the table: a legal notice, a sealed envelope from the Ridge, and a painting he'd never hung. He slid a finger under the flap and read the first line. His face changed, not with fear for himself, but with the heartbreak of a son realizing love can come with terms. He put it in writing. He whispered, "Tomorrow's dinner will tell us if it's a blessing or a transaction. If you believe a mother's hard-won peace should never be bargained away, please tap like and stay with us right here. Because to understand that envelope, we have to return to the morning that seemed so ordinary." The next morning didn't feel like a turning point. It felt like oatmeal, sticky fingers, and Anna asking me, serious, if a care card could sound like a hug. James was at the sink, rinsing fruit, sleeves rolled up, moving like a man who'd decided to stay steady no matter what his mind was carrying. "Mom," Anna said, holding up a card. "You're doing better than you think. Is that huggish?" "That's a full hug," I told her. "The kind you don't have to earn." Nye toddled in with her toy orange and tried to drop it into my bowl like it belonged there. James caught it gently, kissed her cheek, and said, "Not in breakfast. After breakfast we play." Nye squealed, victorious, and for a moment the room felt safe. When we opened Hill Fruits, we did it on schedule. Light on, gate open, fruit stacked clean and bright. Care cards sealed in the box. Notes in the jar. The chalkboard still said Kindness Corner, because we weren't going to let fear rename our life. Luan arrived early with crates and tired eyes. Mr. Hung came by too, bought oranges, and nodded at James like he was checking in without turning it into a show. "You okay?" Mr. Hung asked. James nodded once. "We're working," he said. "That's how we stay okay." At 8:55, the resort pickup was due. A driver would scan our codes, take sealed crates and leave. Simple, clean, safer. James checked the seals again. I checked the code list. Luan stood near the gate, fully awake. Then Mr. Hui showed up, right on time like drama had an alarm clock. He leaned on the gate post and said, loud enough for customers to hear, "Big day, huh? Resort pickup. Fancy." I kept weighing oranges. "It's a normal business day," I said. "Normal business days don't usually come with paperwork," he said, smiling like he'd already written the ending. James looked at him once, calm, unreadable, and went back to the crates. Mr. Hui tried again. "I heard there's a complaint," he said. "About your sign. About your name. About..." A clean white van pulled up with the resort logo on the door, and the air shifted. The driver stepped out with a clipboard and a neutral face. He didn't glance at Mr. Hui. He walked straight to the crates. "Hill Fruits?" he asked. "That's us," James said. The driver scanned the seals, checked the list. No emotion, just procedure. And that procedure felt like protection. He looked at me briefly. "You're Ms. Lai too. Diep?" "Yes," I said, heart tightening. "We're glad you stayed on schedule," he said. A lot of vendors panic when the noise starts. "We don't panic," I answered. He finished loading, locked the van, handed me the signed receipt, then lowered his voice. "The resort received formal notice this morning confirming no third party represents you," he said. "We were told to ignore any outside concerns." My pulse jumped. "From who?" "The independent counsel," he said. "Clean letterhead, signed." He nodded once at James and drove away. Mr. He tried to laugh. "See? Paperwork." But the laugh didn't land because a woman stepped into our gate with a slim folder and the kind of calm that comes from knowing your words carry weight. "Ms. Diep?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm an independent legal representative," she said. "I'm here to serve notice regarding trademark confusion and documented harassment connected to your business name." The shop went quiet. James moved beside me. "What? Notice?" he asked, voice level. She slid out 2 pages. "This is for you," she said, handing me the first. "So, affirms your right to operate under Hill Fruits, outlines steps to challenge any copied name operation, and documents intimidation attempts. It instructs third parties to cease interference with your buyers." My fingers tightened around the paper. It wasn't comfort, it was proof. Then she held up the second notice, turning slightly toward the street. "This is for the copied name stall owner," she said. "It requires immediate cessation of misleading labels and prohibits further interference. The resort has been copied. Local authorities have been copied." Mr. He blurted, "Who paid for that?" "The sponsoring party requested anonymity," she said, calm as a clock. But her eyes flicked to James for half a second. Luan let out a breath. Mr. Hung spoke up, plain and steady. "Good. Let the fruit shop sell fruit." A woman in line nodded. Another whispered, "Finally." The representative pointed to the number at the bottom of my page. "If you experience any new interference, call this line," she said. "Escalation will be handled appropriately." Then she left, efficiently, like she'd set a boundary and walked away. Mr. Hoy, who had loved being the loudest voice, suddenly had nothing that mattered to say. He backed off the gate and disappeared down the road. James looked at the paper in my hands and whispered, "That's action. That's your father," I whispered back. James's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with something complicated. "He's proving it," he said, "at least today." We kept working. The shop lights stayed on. Anna's care cards still went into their basket. Nye still needed her snack at the same time she always did. And by late afternoon, the copied name stall across the way went quiet. Shutter down, no music, no new sign. That night, we ate at our small table, and I demanded James feed her again. He made airplane sounds until she laughed herself breathless. Anna read her newest card aloud like a promise. "You are safe here." James clapped softly. Best words in town, he told her. When the girls finally slept, the house went still. James placed 3 things on the kitchen table: the legal notice, the sealed envelope from the ridge, and the painting leaning in the light. I sat across from him. "Dinner is coming," I said. He nodded. "Yeah. Are you hoping for peace?" I asked. "Or preparing for a test?" "Both," he admitted, eyes on the envelope. I rested my hand on the table close to his. "Whatever happens," I said, "we don't trade our life for someone else's comfort." "Agreed," he said. Then he slid a finger under the envelope flap. He opened it like a man who'd learned every promise needs proof. He unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across the first line, and the air in our kitchen changed. What is it?" I whispered. James didn't answer. He just stared at the words, steady but suddenly heavier, as if tomorrow's dinner had already stepped into the room. My heart is pounding right along with hers. Before we hear what's written on that page, please hit subscribe and stay with this family until the truth finally comes out. James kept the paper off the table, away from crumbs, away from the ordinary. He read the first line twice, then looked at me like the room had changed. "It's from him," he said. "Not Dad. Not yet." He cleared his throat and began. "Tomorrow, 6 p.m., Harborview Restaurant, public entrance, private room. Bring the painting. Bring Ms. Lee to Diep. Bring the girls if you choose. No lawyers. I will speak first." His hand tightened when he reached the next part. "I instructed counsel to protect Hill Fruits from interference. The copied name operation will receive notice. The resort will receive notice. In return, I ask this: do not file criminal charges based on what you already have until after you hear me." The letter wasn't denial. It was an admission wrapped in a request. James read the last paragraph quieter, like it was meant for one person. I used control like a rope. Ropes hurt the hands that hold them. "I am sorry. Give me one meal to tell the truth." When he finished, I felt that familiar choice older women recognize. Hope that might heal you, and hope that might fool you. "He's trying," I said. James exhaled. "He's negotiating." "Maybe both," I answered, "but we go with our eyes open." James's gaze drifted to Anna's painting leaning against the wall. "He wants me to bring it." "We go," I said, steady, "as a family that already has peace. If he offers more, it's a gift. If he asks for silence in exchange for safety, that's a trade. We don't trade our kids." James nodded once. The nod looked practiced, like a boundary he'd been learning to hold. The next morning, Anna sat at the counter making a care card. Tongue tucked in concentration, Nye wandered in with a marker cap like she was reporting for duty. "What are you writing?" I asked. Anna held it up. Big letters, uneven but brave. "You can be good today." "For who?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "The man James doesn't talk about." James froze for a heartbeat. Then he crouched beside her. "That's a strong card," he told her. "Thank you." His eyes went wet, quiet tears that felt like proof of how hard he'd been holding himself together. Nai slapped her own card on the counter. Son, a house and a stick figure with enormous arms. She announced, "Daddy Big." James laughed once, real. It didn't erase the fear. It gave us air. At Hill Fruits, we kept the gate open and the chalkboard steady. Kindness Corner. People came for oranges and left with opinions. Mr. Hui didn't show up, and that absence felt like a warning. Luan stayed close. Officer Thu stopped by briefly and said, "If you need me near the entrance tonight, call." James only nodded. By late afternoon, we dressed without turning it into ceremony. James wrapped the painting in brown paper, not hiding it, protecting it. Anna kept her care card flat on her lap, like it could soften stone. Harborview's private room felt too quiet. The door closed behind us. James found my hand under the table and held it lightly, steady. Then the door opened. James's mother stepped in first, perfect and stiff. Mr. Hung followed. The glasses didn't hide the exhaustion around his eyes. For a moment, nobody spoke. Mr. Hung walked past James and stopped in front of me. "Ms. Lai Tu Diep," he said, voice controlled, edges trembling. "I owe you an apology." His wife's mouth tightened, but he continued. "You struck me," he said, not accusing, remembering. "You did it protecting my son, and when I saw James cry for me, even with evidence that could ruin me, I understood what I refused to understand." James's jaw flexed. "Say it." Mr. Hung met his eyes. "Control is not love," he said softly. "It's fear wearing a suit." James unwrapped the painting and set it on the table. Anna's colors filled the room. House, porch light, 4 stick figures holding hands, and one smaller figure off to the side, drawn like someone who wanted in but didn't know how. Mr. Hung stared at that smaller figure like it was a mirror. Anna slid her care card forward. "For you," Mr. Hung read the words. "You can be good today," and his throat worked. "Thank you," he whispered. His wife started to cut in, clipped and cold. Mr. Hung lifted a hand, not harsh, just final. "We came to listen," he said. Then he opened his folder. "I sent the legal notice," he said to James. "The resort has been told no one represents you but you. The copied name stall is being challenged. That is not a gift. It is a correction." James didn't soften. "Why now?" Mr. Hung's voice dropped. "Because someone is circling you," he said, "and they're doing it to reach me." He slid one page forward, enough to show a payment trail without turning dinner into a courtroom. "Mr. Hui is loud," Mr. Hung said, "but he isn't alone." My breath caught. "So who is?" Mr. Hung held James's. "Isgasin, a man inside my company," he said. "A man who knows my weakness is my son." The room went cold in a quiet way. Then Mr. Hung pushed forward a final document, already signed. "It is my written blessing," he said. I recognize your family. I end interference. I support Hill Fruits without ownership, without control. James stared at the signature. Quietly, he said. Mr. Hung nodded, shame and reality in the same movement. My wife isn't ready, he admitted. My board is cruel, and I don't have endless time to fix what I broke. James's eyes sharpened. Are you sick? Mr. Hung didn't deny it. I have been warned, he said softly. Warnings become deadlines. Silence fell. Then Mr. Hung placed a small black envelope at the center of the table. And there is one more thing, he said. The part that will feel like a transaction. James didn't blink. Say it. In that envelope is the name, Mr. Hung said. The man moving against you. If you open it, you start a war. If you don't, you remain a target. James's hand hovered over the envelope. Anna leaned forward, small voice steady. James, are we safe? And the room held its breath, waiting for his answer. I'm sitting here with my hands clenched, because that envelope could protect this family or pull them into something darker. Before James decides, please hit subscribe and stay with us, because the next moment will change everything. James's hand hovered over the black envelope. Anna leaned forward, her care card between her palms. James, are we safe? James squeezed my hand under the table. We're safe, he said, because we stay together and we tell the truth. James looked at his father. You brought an envelope to dinner, he said. You want me to open it? I want you out of the dark, Mr. Hung answered. And what do you want in return? James asked. Mr. Hung's shoulders dipped. Time, he admitted. To fix what I broke without dragging your family through mud. I kept my voice calm. My children don't live in time, Mr. Hung. They live in mornings. If someone is circling us, we need light. Mr. Hung nodded once. Then open it, he said. Just don't say the name aloud in this room. James broke the seal. Inside was a plain card. He read it in one sharp breath, then folded it and set it face down. His face went still in a way that told me the name mattered. Someone inside your company, he said quietly. Someone who can move. Paper and people? Mr. Hung didn't deny it. Yes. And Mr. Hui? James asked. A mouth, Mr. Hung said. Paid to stir the village. James's mother tried to cut in, sharp, defensive. But Mr. Hung raised a hand. We're here to listen, he said, and for the first time she stopped. Mr. Hung looked at James. I sent counsel, he said. The resort has notice. The copied name stall has notice. Hill Fruits is protected. James held his father's gaze. And you asked me not to press charges until after dinner. Mr. Hung's voice thinned. Because I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid of what the world would see? Afraid of losing what control I have left. James didn't blink. Say it plainly. Mr. Hung swallowed. I used control like love, he said, and it hurt you. James slid Anna's painting onto the table. The porch light she drew seemed to glow under the restaurant lamp. She made this because she wants our house to feel whole, James said. You asked me to bring it like proof. I still want you. Mr. Hung stared at the small figure drawn at the edge, like someone wanting in, but not knowing how. I want you, he said, rough. I just never learned how to want you without grabbing. The words didn't fix the past, but they sounded like truth, not theater. James leaned back. Here's what happens, he said. I won't file charges tonight. Not because you asked. Because my children are here. My chest loosened at the restraint in that choice. But tomorrow, James continued, I meet Counsel and Officer Thu. I show them that name. I keep moving. Mr. Hung nodded quickly. Good. And you don't get to hide behind quietly, James added. Quiet means respectful, not secret. You will provide documentation about who paid Mr. Hai. We'll support Hill Fruits without ownership or control. Mr. Hung's face tightened. That will make enemies. James's voice stayed level. So did what you did to your son. Silence fell. Then Mr. Hung lowered his eyes. I will, he said. Because you're right. James looked at his mother. You don't have to approve of Ms. Lai to Diep, he said softly, to stop hurting her. His mother's eyes flicked to Anna, then to Nao. I don't know how, she whispered. Start with one thing, I said gently. Stop calling our peace a scandal. She didn't promise, but she didn't attack again either. Mr. Hung stood. One more truth, he said. I've had health warnings. Enough to realize my time isn't endless, and I was terrified I'd die with my son looking at me like a stranger. James's eyes went wet, quick and unwilling. Mr. Hung bowed his head, small, honest. I'm sorry, he said, to you, Ms. Lei Tu Diep, and to you, my son, for confusing control with love. James didn't rush into a reunion. He simply said, I heard you. It wasn't a perfect ending. It was a first brick. The next morning, Mr. Hui arrived at our gate again with a clipboard and loud words. Inspection, complaints, community, the standards. This time the world didn't tilt. Officer Thu appeared. Our counsel's voice came through the phone, steady. 2 sentences of clean notice cut through Mr. Hui's noise, and his borrowed authority drained away.